Her work is included in many museum collections, including the Brooklyn Museum, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, and the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Smithsonian Institute collection. She received a CAPS grant for her drawings in 1981 and a Puffin Foundation grant in 2013, and a New York Foundation Award in 2015 for her graffiti landscape paintings, which, by the way, I think are the best. This summer, she made 2 videos that can be seen on YouTube, one of the art and life of her recently deceased husband, Ben Shechter, and another called Brownsville Childhood. I introduce to you Laura Shechter.
Hi. Hi. This is a student work. I went to Brooklyn College and graduated in 1965. The thing that everybody was doing in those days was abstract expressionism. And so this was my kind of school masterpiece. And the only school work that's still existing. The few school pieces I had with my mother, who decided that they had to be freshened up, and she repainted all of them. We won't go too much into that. And while I was at Brooklyn College, my main teacher and mentor was Ad Reinhardt, who is, it may seem strange since I'm a realist, who was the father of minimalism, but everything about the basis of all my aesthetics comes from Ad Reinhardt, who was also a great Orientalist, and because of him, I traveled around the world twice. And this was done in 1965. This was done just a few months after I had finished school. I was living in Lower Manhattan on Mulberry Street, and I was working for the Department of Social Services. And they needed some people to work in Staten Island. There was nobody in Staten Island. And of course, there was no work. And I had nothing to do, and I had this view out the window, and I took one of the forms and I used it as a ruler, and the series of paintings that I did was based on some crazy mathematical system that I made up using this form. And I went traveling the next year for a year, and this was in Pakistan. Now, I decided that traveling is kind of like being a policeman, you know, really long periods of dullness, and then there's some dramatic thing. Well, the dramatic thing here happened the day before, which was a head-on collision with a 1956 Chevrolet in no man's land between Pakistan and Iran. This is a travel drawing that I did. So while I was traveling, I visited museums, archaeological sites, and did a lot of drawing. And one of the things that I learned from traveling was the relationship between weather and what you actually see in the art that's produced in the countries, what their work really looks like. When I came home in 1967, this was the first painting that I did. One of the other things that I figured out is that I had no plans. Everything seems to always happen like spontaneously. Like I had no plans to become a realist painter. Now, this was a furnished room, and the only thing that I added here is I bought this orange cloth that I put on the chair. And I still have the orange cloth, and it did show up in a few paintings over the years. And then I met my husband, and he knew about my traveling, and he said to me, well, I'd like to go around the world too. So I said, okay, fine, I'll go around the world again. And so here I am, I'm drawing, and this is in central India. And then when you come to Hong Kong, which is more civilized, you know, you're not surrounded by people anymore. And I did the same thing, a lot of drawing. And when I came home, I found that there was another change in my work. And I decided that I was working on masonite, and I don't know why, but I decided that I wanted to get more technical skills. I wanted to learn more how to render. And this series that I'm going to show you is one thing where I was doing the same still life, but in different medium. I would always start out these days with a pencil drawing. And this one was followed by the oil painting. This was done in the late 70s. A silver point, which I have one here, which is drawing with silver wire on a coated surface. That was the technique that was used during the Renaissance and then came back again in the 19th century. A watercolor. And then in the 80s, when I was doing lithographs, I did a lithograph of the same sequence. And so I was doing this work on masonite, and this is something else I did. I was doing things with multi-panels. This one was done for a reason that comes out of art history, and that is in the 19th century when they had genre painting, still life was always the lowest. And the idea here, which was only in my own head, was to kind of have when you had the things in the churches, where you had the Madonna and everything, and then you had on either side the people who were giving money. So this was kind of my thing to support still life and say that it's important. And another series that I did, this is a real shadow box. I would actually, and this is 3 panels that I painted separately, and then I put it in, and this is trompe l'oeil, which means that it fools the eye. I mean, it's almost impossible not to think that this is not reality. Okay, then somewhere in the late 80s, I started working on canvas, and my work became more colorful. And one of the things, the theme in my work that carries over to like the latest series that I'm doing with Cityscapes is the whole thing with decoration. So this is some wallpaper. And this one is a very nice tablecloth, I think probably from the 1930s. And so it's just, again, playing around with decorative elements. And every time that I did use flowers or fruit and vegetables, they were all artificial. And that's because my work takes a very long time, and everything would just die. One of the things that you have to deal with when you're working a very long time as a still life painter is, do you paint the dust? So there was sometimes I painted or drew the dust, and sometimes I foofed it away. Okay, now the theme that I sort of said that I was going to talk about today, which was that there was a crisis in my work, which is somewhere in the late 1990s, early 2000s. I just had nothing to stay in still life anymore. I didn't know what to do. And again, everything is chance. My husband had a photograph of the gowanus. This is not it. And I started doing the cityscapes very slowly. And in a way, I'm very happy for this event, because sometimes a painter can just wind up just painting the same painting over again. But having to start with something new, which was the cityscape, which I absolutely knew nothing about, and everything was a great discovery. Like in this one, the great discovery is going to be, how do I paint the sky? Okay, this one, which was the gowanus, is the first time I ever painted water. And so as I was working on these things, it had to do with humility. The humility was, how do you deal with something that you're extremely competent in, and then go back and be totally incompetent? And so there even became a point where I dropped out of the art world from about 2004 to 2009, and had very little to do with almost, even people. But it was also this, that I was concentrating on doing this new subject matter without any burden, without any obligation to anybody. Now this one brings up one of the things about the way I work, which the cityscapes are photo-based. And the thing comes up now, it's called trespassing. So in the beginning, when I wanted to photograph things, because I like the panorama, besides, bridges, I like to photograph from bridges. I also like to photograph from the 6th floor to the 8th floor. And I would troll the New York Times, and always the word I would be looking for is VUS, which means views. And sometimes I would come to a building, and then they would only have, the little apartment that they want you to see, and then you go out in the hall and it says, do not go beyond this point, do not go beyond this point without a hard hat. And so you would get up there, and sometimes not only would they not have any windows, but they would not have any walls. And so this is something from State Street. I think this is one of those situations. And just to show you, I stopped doing I stopped doing drawings before every painting, at this point. But this one does not relate to a painting. And my cityscape drawings were a little bit different than my still life drawings. For me, they're softer and they're not as tight. This is something from the Manhattan Bridge. And this is another thing about when I'm doing this kind of work. This is the Manhattan Bridge on the bicycle side looking towards Queens. This doesn't exist anymore because a house went up, a house went down. So some of these cityscape paintings become a documentation. And sometimes I've even done the same scene over a few year period. And this was the first time that I did something with graffiti. Again, this was only by chance. I was walking through the Williamsburg Bridge. The light was right because I came back another time and it looked like nothing. And so even though I did this one relatively early, I'm not sure what year it was an isolated painting. And when I went back into the art world again, Marshall Price, who was the curator at the National Academy, made reference to this painting, and because I had it in the annual, and he told me about 5 points. And I'm sure everybody here knows the story about 5 points. Yes. And basically doing this painting just totally changed the whole direction that my work was taking. And I became very involved with doing graffiti. And even though this one has work that's by a lot of, very serious graffiti artists, the graffiti that I became much more involved in and much more committed to is when the people would sign on walls, and even just signing on top of each other. And also when the crisis was over, I was able to paint the still life again. And one of the things that you can do with still life is you can make other kinds of statements. I happen to be very much against neoclassical painting, contemporary neoclassical painting. And so this has references to 19th century still life painting. So instead of being angry, I took the idea and did this. And this is probably my most complex painting. And this is, again, that other thing that I showed you from the Manhattan Bridge. This building does not exist anymore. At first, they just got rid of the graffiti over here, and then one time I was taking the train and I looked and the building wasn't there. I get really upset with things like that. I'm sure there's going to be some really huge tower. Oh, that's a picture of me photographing. This is a really interesting place. This is behind City Fields in Long Island City. And then I started with this other idea. Some of the best graffiti you see now are on the trucks. And there are two kinds of trucks. Well, there's even two kinds of graffiti, one which they call legal and one which they call illegal. And so the illegal stuff usually gets done 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And this happens to be some really fabulous graffiti that was on the B&D train going into Kings Highway. And I didn't know really what to do with it. I have to tell you the sad news. This building doesn't exist anymore either. And so I said to myself, well, why don't I see if I could do things where I combine the trucks with some of the walls, or if I have a photograph that's not really good enough to be a painting. And so for me, this is a very big push because I invented this little sidewalk in this little street here, totally against my personality to do that. And then another thing, even though this is the first painting that I did, and I'll probably do more in the future, I said, well, what'll happen if I combine the still life with the cityscape? So this is that view that was in that bridge thing, and then I decided, well, maybe I'll put even a little graffiti on it. And so I don't know what's going to happen, but now this is another story. This is in Park Slope. This is a fabulous building on 5th Avenue and 20-something Street. And what's so fabulous about it is if you'll get close here and you'll really look at this, it's all those brands that we used to hear about that don't exist anymore, like Bendix, And so that's all kind of fading. And we have some really good graffiti here, you know, where people are signing over each other. And then as a joke, this guy does a lot of things. I did this and I did that. But again, this is going to become a condo, and this graffiti just does not exist anymore. Now this is one of my other favorite places to go to. This is on the Manhattan Bridge looking towards Chinatown. And what's interesting here is the landlord is encouraging this. And that's sort of what's really interesting. It's what landlords, what developers are encouraging it. And so because it's being encouraged, this one never changes. But this area, because I've been photographing this for like 3 years now, becomes very intense and very interesting. In my other painting, this was like the most important element. This one is off the Bowery. This is that. And if you could compare them, some of this up here is the same, but everything here is different. There the windows are broken and everything. Here, this is all new windows. This is being put in. But the thing is that the developer chose to keep the graffiti. And this is just, you know, it's very rich. The best graffiti artists will come here and they'll do their thing. And this is, I'm going to show you my last two paintings. Now this one was something that I took from the number 7 train. And this is very faded here. It's probably from the 70s. It almost doesn't exist. This is very complex. They're already building a building in front of this. You can't see this anymore. I had to invent this. I have to let you know that I don't like being creative. I don't like to invent. And this area in here in my photograph, because the train was moving, it was impossible, so I even had to fake it. But this is, it's one of the problems that you have when you, like I say, with still life, I have control over everything. But when I'm using these photographs that I'm taking with my camera and I'm taking not in a perfect situation, it's only experience that helps me do it. Now this will be the last one. And this is a recent trip that I did over the summer. I went to the Bronx. Eventually I went to Fordham Road, but this is Jerome Avenue. This is the number 4 train. And I'm walking and I see that. Now, what I was thinking about when I was thinking about this, now we don't know what this means. It says here Ramos Autoparts. I mean, why did he hire someone to do this? I mean, not only, I mean, I left it out, but these women even have little, bee things. So I'm like thinking about Dutch painting. And when you have the Dutch genre painting and they have all this iconography that we don't know what it is, I found out that like the iconography, the only one that we do know is that when someone's playing a musical instrument, it's somehow supposed to stand for sex. But almost all the other, metaphorical things they have. Now, we will never know why Ramos picked this image as an advertisement for his store. I just want to leave with one thing that I'd like to say about graffiti, which I think that graffiti beautifies urban blight. And I think that the only thing is when I'm doing these paintings and I'm documenting this work, which I told you a lot of it doesn't exist, and I very much like the fact that I'm supporting the craft of these people the same way in my still life that I supported the craft of some of the hand-painted china from the 19th century. And it's as I say, it's all transitory, and the city is always in change, and I'm very happy that I'm able to record the change that's happening in the city.